I've spent a lot of time over the years speaking with Sam Harris. We've spoken publicly half a dozen times and privately far more than that. We're coming at the same problems, I would say, from quite different perspectives and establishing some concordance over time. Today, we went down the rabbit hole of rabbit holes, I suppose, discussing the fragmentation of the narrative landscape on the social media front and what that means for cultural incoherence, weakness, demoralization, deceit, self-deception, and inability to understand one another. And so join us as we attempt to clarify the catastrophe of infinite plurality. Well, Mr. Harris, it looks like it's time for our approximate.
So first impression, I like their topic. Yeah, this sounds like it could be interesting. And we're off to a good start with Peterson. He's sitting back in the kind of position that means we're more likely to get the kind of Peterson I like than when he's leaned forward and looking like he's ready to fight a wolf over scraps of meat.
Approximately annual conversation.
Yeah, nice. You're the clock that ticks once a year.
Yeah, well, I suspect that's more than enough. So tell me what you're thinking about lately, Sam, on the intellectual side and what you're doing.
Well, it is actually relevant to the chaos in our politics at the moment. I'm increasingly worried that we have effectively rendered ourselves ungovernable based on the way we have shattered the information landscape. And I think independent media of the sort that we're indulging now is part of that problem. I mean, I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but I've been fairly vociferous in criticizing some of our mutual friends, and in my case, some maybe former friends, but fellow podcasters and people in independent media. And I just think they've been part of this shattering, and it's been fairly obvious. And the cases are different, but many people have been quite irresponsible in the way that they have platformed people uncritically and let them spread truly divisive and dangerous misinformation. I mean, I'm thinking especially of in the aftermath of October 7th and the global explosion of anti-Semitism. We've had some very big podcasts like Tucker's and Joe's platform Holocaust deniers and revisionists. And it's been quite insane out there. And it's just, and that's just one piece of it. I mean, you can talk about COVID or Trump or Ukraine or, I mean, pick your ugly object out there. There's just a radical divergence of opinion into these echo chambers we built for ourselves. And it seems to be very difficult to cross political lines. I mean, it's somehow deeper than politics, actually. So anyway, I'm just increasingly worried about that. And, I'm trying to hold up my side of the conversation in ways so as to cross those lines. But I'm just noticing that it's in many cases, it's proving impossible.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am aware of that. It's actually part of the reason I thought it would be useful for us to talk today. So I want to think about how to respond to that to begin with. Well, I think the first thing that we should probably note is that this is a consequence of hyperconnectivity and stunning ease of communication, right? So, I mean, it's obviously the case.
I would say the problem's broader than that. I agree with everything they're saying, and Peterson, I think, is onto a good point here, but there's something bigger than that, it seems to me, going on. This can't be just ease of communication. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but it seems to me this runs somehow even deeper, and there's something else mixing with the ease of communication that is causing everything to get so divisive. We used to be able to not talk religion and politics at the table and have a good Thanksgiving. That's gone away. It could be entirely what Peterson's saying now, but my thought is there's something else, and it's not coming to mind what that something else is. It's a feeling I'm having right now more than a thought. So if you have any ideas about what else it is, post it in chat, although I may not check chat. It might flow better if I don't. And if I don't, share your ideas in the comments.
That the landscapes of communication that once held us together, for better or worse, are now so multiplicitous that they're numberless. And so what does that mean? I think what it means in part, and this is where I think our conversation might get particularly interesting, is that we don't have a shared story anymore. And I think a culture is literally a shared story. And a story is a structure. This is, been part of our ongoing discussion for a very long period of time, right? The relationship between the perceptual framing that is constituted by a story and, let's say, the domain of objective facts, right? This is a very thorny problem. But it seems to me that you have a culture when people share the same story or the same stories. They have the same shared reference points. And with an infinite landscape of communication, that fragments indefinitely. And then
okay, yeah, I think he's making a good point there. And like during the 80s, it was very fucking like edgy and punk rock to point out that society was brainwashing us, that with the limited media, the radio stations all playing the same songs, us all seeing the same television shows and movies, us all watching the same commercials, that we were very much, that there was an act of brainwashing, and it was cool to like rebel against that. But I've noticed we're fractioning more and more and more, not just in the social media, but also in the availability of so much content. So somebody can spend all day listening to old 50s music, and somebody else can be listening to 80s music. One person can be watching all the blockbuster movies, and someone else can spend all their time watching, foreign films. And while at first that felt like just total freedom and fantastic, as it went on, I started to notice like, oh shit, there was something to us all watching the same thing. It gave us reference points. And I think back to when I was a little kid and the show V was on for the first time. I like that little mini series about the aliens coming. I was at the right age that was like an intense show for us. And I can remember the way we all went to school and it went around the playground at lunch. Who saw V and who didn't. If you weren't allowed to watch it, you weren't cool. And if you had been allowed to watch it, it gave us something to talk about. So we're losing our shared stories in multiple ways. And if AI starts creating custom content for each of us, if the VEO3 keeps going and eventually it's able to create a movie live based on your personality, and eventually that Netflix, you're not sitting down and looking at suggestions of movies that everyone watches, but you're sitting down and watching a custom movie made just for you, we're going to lose that ability to have discussions with people about the big blockbuster movies or television shows. So everything's a give and take.
No one, see, Sam, let me tell you, I might as well, just to annoy you, just to get the ball rolling. I spent a lot of time thinking about the story of the Tower of Babel. There's two stories in Genesis that describe how things go wrong. And one story is the flood, and that's the consequence of absolute chaos bursting forth, essentially. But the Tower of Babel is a story about both totalitarianism and fragmentation. So what happens is the engineers get together, because that's who it is. It's the city builders, the tool makers, those who create weapons of war, the city builders, the engineers. They get together and they build these towers for the aggrandizement of the local potentates. So there was competition in the Middle East of that time to build the highest tower for the glory of the local ruler. And that presumption, so you can think about that as misaligned aim on the sociological front. The consequence of this misaligned aim is a kind of, because the aim of the culture is wrong. Words themselves lose their meaning. That's what happens in the story, right? Everybody ends up speaking a different language, and then the towers fall apart. So it's because the story that's being told is one of human self-aggrandizement. That's part of it. And the culture pathologizes and then disintegrates. And so I see that happening in our culture. There's a technological element of it, obviously, that the technological utopians are driving this. The transhumanists are driving this. And we're aiming at the wrong goal. And the consequence of that is that our language is falling apart and we don't share the same reference points. That's part of what's happening. So I'm curious about what you think about that, how that fits in with your concern, your emergent concern. Like when you say fragmentation, Sam, what is it that you think is fragmenting? Because it's not the objective view of the world precisely, although the scientific enterprise even seems to be shaky and corrupt and falling apart in many ways.
Well, so I agree with that. I think the analogy to Babel is quite apt. I don't think bringing Doge into Babel would have helped much. I think it is technological. Yeah, it's just the fact that because of I think largely it's a story of social media, but it's really the internet generally, because of the information technology we have built, people can find endless confirmation of whatever their cherished opinion is, and it's no longer there's some cultural immune system that has been lost, right? If you had to go to the physical conference out in the real world to meet the other people who were sure they've been abducted by UFOs, well, then you'd be meeting these people. You would see the obvious signs of dysfunction in their lives, and you would.
Fuck you, Sam. People who have been abducted by UFOs are one of two things. They could be mentally ill, sure, but also there could be something fucking going on. We're not sure. And I think we should be really careful about putting that shit down. Because if anyone's experienced anything, and maybe it's not UFOs, maybe something other paranormal activity is happening and their brain's interpreting it that way, but there could actually be something going on. And even for a person who thinks that's ridiculous, I think you need to be careful how you discuss the people who have had those experiences, because if it's real for them, it's profoundly personal and perhaps disturbing. Like, for instance, Whitley Strieber, is an author who wrote books once he started having recovered memories and realizing, whether real or not, he felt like he was realizing that he'd been abducted by aliens. He put out the book Communion, and at one point he described that he got like an anal probe of some sort. I've heard him say that he's kind of a sexually repressed person, and that he doesn't even like discussing normal sexual things, and that experience was extremely traumatic for him. It might have felt like the R word, and when he shared that I think was the source of the trope that you found running from the 80s onward, of when somebody talks about having a UFO experience, immediately jokes go to anal probes. And apparently that really hurt Whitley Strieber. And so I think the dismissive nature Sam has here discussing UFO enthusiasts or people who believe they've had encounters was bullshit. Sam can do better than that.
There'd be more friction to the maintenance of this new conviction, just based on the collision with other ancillary facts that have social relevance to you. But online, and again, this even precedes social media. This is true of the internet back in the late 90s. You can just go down a rabbit hole and find endless confirmation that's fairly anonymized, right? You know, the 20-minute documentary that blew your mind and convinced you that the World Trade Center towers were brought down by the Bush administration. You didn't know that it was made by some 18-year-old in his mother's basement, and you didn't have to know that. You were just looking at the product online. But if you had to meet this person, all of a sudden you realize that this is the maintenance of this fiction becomes quite a bit harder. So we're living now, I think, in the second generation of that moment where it really is bottomless. I mean, the ocean of misinformation and half-truth and misunderstanding is bottomless. And the tools we have built to rectify misunderstandings and to spot lies and to be better truth seekers are there, but they have been, in some sense, this is asymmetric warfare. They're no match.
One thing I hope they get to is the idea of truth and the importance of honesty. They had done discussions about this in the past, and what I was always disappointed about was they both come at the importance of honesty in two different ways, and they both have two different definitions of truth. And all of their discussions of that got bogged down in arguing over which one of them is right about their definition of truth. Like, fuck off. Everybody's right. Nobody cares about who's right anymore. It's not impressive. We know everybody thinks they're right. They should have just accepted that they both use the word truth differently and then discussed how they overlap and why honesty is so important regardless of which definition you're using. I think honesty is the one thing that is really, really fucking important and could help save us. And so I would have loved to hear Peterson and Sam Harris coming at honesty from different directions and showing how, whether you're an atheist like Sam Harris or whether you're a Christian, I mean, Peterson's not admitting he's a Christian or not, but he's obviously defending that viewpoint. If we can get more ideas out there that are like, hey, here's something that we could all agree on. It's good from this perspective and this perspective. Let's explain why believers should find honesty important and why atheists should. Let's explain why the right should agree it's important and the left should. Let's discuss why capitalists and communists should, and show that honesty is important in every one of these world outlooks and value sets, so that we could all come to an agreement on how important it is. So I hope they get to that at some point. I've never seen them do that yet. And they've both done excellent work on their own about the importance of honesty. Sam wrote the short book called Lying or something, and Peterson had chapter 8 in his first 12 Rules for Life.
For the information waste product that can be produced more quickly, right? I mean, this is just the old
Well, it's
problem.
easier to produce noise than signal, obviously.
Yeah,
Right.
or pseudo signal. Yeah, I mean, there's so much that purports to be signal, right? I mean, and again, this is probably socially more inconvenient for you than it is for me. But I mean, many of your bedfellows or former bedfellows are the principal parts of this problem. I mean, they're the gods and goddesses on this landscape. I'm thinking of someone like Candace Owens, who's quite literally trafficking in blood libels now on her incredibly popular podcast. I mean, she's just gone berserk as far as I can tell. And yet, what is the style of conversation that would disconfirm all of that for her audience? At this point, I don't know, because I think what's happened is we've trained up a culture of people or cultures of people that simply don't care about facts. Really, they want a story that aligns with their, in some sense, their confirmation bias. I mean, they have certain things they want to believe. There's certain ideas they like the taste of, and then they just want people.
We all have that to varying degrees, and Sam and Jordan aren't above it. Even if you understand the concept of confirmation bias and you work hard to counterbalance that, you don't get rid of your confirmation bias. The best you can do is understand what your confirmation bias is, recognize what things you're likely to want to believe, what things you're likely to not want to believe. And when you encounter information, you should mindfully examine your emotional state, realize that the more you want to believe it, the more you should question it and check for the opposite idea. And the more you emotionally want to disbelieve it, the harder you should try to steelman it. I can't comment specifically on Candace Owens or his thoughts on her audience because I don't follow her. I've seen her before a little bit. I saw her on Tim Dillon. I think that's it.
People catering to that appetite, and there's a good business in that.
I know as a clinical psychologist that any the consequence of the fact that we have to ground our perceptions in an axiomatic framework. And I mean, this has been my concern with the primacy of the story right from the beginning. And I think the deeper question is, is there some necessary structure to that fundamental axiomatic framework? The postmodernist claim was that the fundamental postmodernist claim is that there is no uniting meta-narrative, right? We live in the postmodern world now. The postmodern world is a place of local truths. And the French intellectuals, they not only decided that was necessary and an improvement. And now we see the consequences of that. We're in a landscape of infinite narratives. And the question is, how do you define a rank order of narratives such that some are valid and some are invalid? The idea of misinformation is obviously predicated on the notion that certain narratives are invalid. And that seems self-evident to me. I wouldn't exactly call myself a fan of the direction that Candace Owens has decided to walk down, but I'm not going to say anything more about her. And so, what I've been trying to struggle with is, and this has been the basis of many of our discussions in the final analysis, is what is the proper grounding for a narrative framework?
Actually, I think it's great there that Peterson avoided commenting directly on Candace Owens, because that could have brought out the grumpy old man in him. Sam Harris is much better overall at maintaining a good emotional state while discussing something he's critical of. He stays nice and calm. Peterson, when he gets upset, even if he's saying something that I agree with, once he's angry, he says it in a way that I find off-putting and I think pushes people away from hearing any points he has to make. So I'm glad he skipped past that.
And I mean, my understanding of your position is that that's why you've turned right from the beginning to the world of objective fact, so to speak. But the problem is that there's a lot of facts, and which ones to prioritize and which ones to ignore is a very thorny question. And, one of the things you referred to obliquely was that, well, when you and I were young, because we're about the same age, I think you're 4 years younger than me, we had narratives that united us as a culture. There was there were fewer people. There was more ethnic homogeneity, at least in the local environments in the world. There were information brokers that were extraordinarily powerful. The universities, the newspapers, the TV stations, the radio stations, and they weren't very easy to get access to, and they had gatekeepers, and at least some of the time, those gatekeepers seemed meritorious as well as arbitrary. And, it could easily be that the fragmentation of the landscape is a consequence of technological revolution, and also perhaps of you had pointed to the irresponsibility of the participants in that landscape. I mean, I think it's also, or even more primarily, that they're flooded with information and finding it very difficult to keep up.
Well, they're also just not disposed to function by the old norms that the gatekeepers, I mean, for all their faults, they had standards, right? I mean, the New York Times had a standard.
But Sam, those, I agree with you. But I also would say that those institutions, the gatekeeping institutions, have also revealed themselves as catastrophically flawed in the last 5 to 10 years. I mean, I'm interested in your take on this. Like, you brought up October 7th and the rise of anti-Semitism, and I've been tracking that with a couple of friends of mine, and we've been...
Now, with what I said earlier about we lost something when we lost that that control, like the limited radio stations and televisions and such, I will point out that because of that environment, I was very much drawn to counterculture and the punk scene. And there was always that outside the mainstream push. Like the Dead Kennedys lyrics was one way messages got out. There were local zines and stuff like that. But back then there was higher resistance to doing it. You couldn't just go onto Facebook or something and start slapping up memes that you found somewhere. It took real work to get underground messages out in the past. And that may have been a kind of gatekeeping on its own. We may have gotten higher quality counterculture when it was harder to do. And it may have been better when only the people who were willing to put the extra work into trying to get counterculture messages out were the ones that were doing it. It might be too easy now for that. And so counterculture might be getting shitty because of that.
Spending a lot of time fighting it off in all sorts of ways, some of which are public and some of which aren't. And I'm appalled by it. What's happened in Canada on the anti-Semitic front since October 7th is something I never thought I'd see in my lifetime. It embarrasses me to the core. My goddamn government came out the other day, those bloody liberals, and they...
Okay. If he's got a point he wants to get across to people and he wants liberals to listen with an open mind, he's using the wrong fucking tactic here. The way he leaned in, and I'm a fan of fucking swearing, but he's not doing it in a friendly manner. He's preaching to the choir when he talks like that. All that's going to do is appeal to people's confirmation bias. If you already agree with him, you're going to like this. If you naturally disagree with him and have the opposite confirmation bias, the way he's doing it is counterproductive. As far as the idea of the rise of anti-Semitism in Canada, I have no idea what the fuck's going on. I don't pay attention to politics, and I'm a fucking hermit that lives cut off from society, so I have no idea what's actually going on out there.
They talked in the aftermath of October 7th about combating Islamophobia, as if that's Canada's problem, which it isn't. And so, and then, you saw what happened across the United States and Canada with regard to the universities, Columbia University in particular, and their absolute silence and complicitness while these terrible demonstrations were going on. Not that I think that the demonstrations themselves should have been, well, we can talk about that. Letting terrorist radicals take over the universities doesn't strike me as a very good solution. So I'm curious about what you think about that, because, well, so like, I think the gatekeepers have abandoned the gates. Like, I don't trust anything the New York Times prints at all. I think they're reprehensible. The universities, I think, are beyond salvaging. I can't see how they can be fixed. Anyways, man, lay it out. Tell me what you think.
I think those, all the way up until those last two statements, I can sign on the dotted line. I think all of these institutions have embarrassed themselves in recent years, and for the reasons that I think you and I would fully agree about. This became most obvious during COVID, but it's the October 7th is more of the same. But I would just point out that the antidote to that, to the failures of institutions, is not new standards. It's really to apply the old standards. I mean, we need the institutions.
Spoken like a true conservative.
Yeah, fine. Well, I mean, so it's but the antidote to failures of science, say, or scientific fraud, is not something other than science. It's just more science, real science, good science, scientific integrity. And so it is with journalism.
I'm finding it kind of striking, the difference in their mannerisms. Like, look at the way Peterson animates and goes into one emotional tone or the other and is moving all over the place. And Sam holds this sort of monotone. He's sitting perfectly still like a little boy who has been warned to behave very well and to sit still while the grown-ups are talking. I just find that striking at the moment.
Journalism or any academic discipline or anything that purports to be truth-seeking, we have standards, and there's nothing wrong with our standards. What's dangerous about the current information landscape, where we have just this contrarian universe where anything that is outside the institutions is considered to have some kind of primacy, right? Where everyone is kind of a citizen journalist, a citizen scientist, where you just kind of flip the mics on and talk for 4 hours, and that's good enough. What that's selecting for are the people who have no standards to even violate, right? I mean, these people are incapable of hypocrisy. I mean, one thing that's good about the New York Times and Harvard and any other institution you would point to that has obvious egg on its face at the moment is that at a minimum they're capable of being shamed by their own hypocrisy. And the people who aren't I would agree with you that there's been some institutional capture where we have people in those institutions who just shouldn't be there, right? But we would make that judgment again by reference to these old standards of academic or journalistic integrity. But Candace Owens just doesn't have that, right? And sorry to beat up on her exclusively. I can move to other names if you want. But I mean, she's
no, it's not. It's the reason
offender.
that I don't. The reason that I'm not inclined to discuss her isn't because I agree with what she's doing. It's because I think the best way to deal with what she's doing is not to discuss her.
Notice her. Okay, but I could say the same thing about Tucker Carlson, right? And you might, whether you agree with me or not, this is my view of him, that he's not in the truth-seeking journalistic integrity business. He's got some other political project that entails spreading a fair amount of misinformation quite cynically and consciously and smearing lots of people. And in the case of, I don't know how deep his anti-Semitism runs, but in the case of that particular topic, midwifing a very misleading conversation with an amateur historian who he considers the greatest historian working in America today, Daryl Cooper.
I'm going to have to go in just under an hour. So even though I think it sounds better on 1.5, I'm going to up it to double speed to see if I can get to the end of this before I have to go.
And the opinion expressed, again, this is the highest possible level in our information ecosystem, to the largest audience. Few historians in human history have ever had a bigger audience than Daryl Cooper had on Tucker's podcast, and then quickly followed by his appearance on Joe Rogan's podcast, right? And on that podcast, he spread the lie, the recycled David Irving point that the Holocaust is not at all what it seemed, and you wouldn't believe it, but the Nazis really never intended to kill the Jews. They just rounded up so many prisoners in their concentration camps and found that they just didn't have enough food during winter to feed them, and they just were put in this just impossible situation, and it might not seem more compassionate to euthanize these starving prisoners in the end, right? That's how they accidentally stumbled into the final solution, right? That's what he spread, again, to the largest possible audience. And in Tucker's case, you had a very, I would say, sinister midwifing.
I haven't seen any of the stuff he's talking about, so I won't comment on it, and that's too fast to sound good. Let's try 175.
Of that conversation. In Joe's case, he just doesn't know when he's in the presence of recycled David Irving, and is just happy to have a conversation with a podcaster of whom he's a great fan. And but yet he's still culpable for not having done enough homework to adequately push back about what's being said to his audience, which is the largest podcast audience on earth. So it's journalistically, and I know Joe doesn't consider himself a journalist, he considers himself a comedian, is just having fun conversations. Great, but what that is tantamount to at this moment, especially in the context of the worst eruption of anti-Semitism we've ever seen in our lifetimes globally, that's tantamount to taking absolutely no responsibility for the kind of information that is flowing unrebutted into the ears of your audience, right? That's why I got angry at Joe, right? I love Joe. Joe's a great person. He's completely in over his head on topics of that sort, and it has a consequence. It has an effect.
Getting the most out of life means being prepared for your life, specifically overall rating of whale.com.
One of the problems, I suppose, in some ways, Sam, is that in this new information landscape, we're all in over our heads.
Yeah, but some of us are alert to that possibility and worried about it and taking steps to course correct and notice our errors, apologize for those errors.
Okay. Well, let's also try to make a distinction here. I mean, there is a distinction that's important to make between accidentally wandering into pathological territory, and causing disruption because of the magnification of your voice. And there's a big difference between that and exploiting the fringe for your own self-aggrandizement. And there's plenty of the latter online. And I've been concerned for some substantial amount of time that online anonymity also drives that. I mean, you talk about the utility of embodied interaction in separating the wheat from the chaff, right? So one of the things you see online is, as you pointed out, if you have a crazy idea, you can find 300 other people who have even a crazier idea of the same sort, and you can get together with them, which you couldn't have done 20 years ago because there's only one of them per 100,000 scattered all around the world, but they can aggregate together quite quickly online. The places that females gather online, for example, are rife with that kind of pathology, and all sorts of psychogenic epidemics spread without any barrier whatsoever in consequence, because young women in particular are susceptible to psychogenic epidemics. And so that's a huge problem. It's also the case that in real world conversation, if I'm talking to you, it's me, and I have to live with the consequences of what I've said to you, assuming we ever meet again, and I have to live with the fact that other people hear about it as well. But if I'm anonymous,
that's a good point.
Then I can say whatever the hell I want. I can gather the fruits of that, and I can dispense with any of the responsibility. And so my sense is that online connectivity magnifies our voice to a degree that it's virtually impossible to be responsible enough to conduct ourselves appropriately, because the reach is just so great. And anonymity literally gives the edge to the psychopaths, predators, and parasites. And this is a huge problem. As a biological, we can think about it as biologists for a moment, Sam. I mean, I would say two things. When the cost of communication is zero, the parasites swarm the system, right? Because the communication is a resource. And abandoned resources attract parasites. And what is it now? 50% of internet communication is bots. And a huge part of the reason for that is that communication is free. But it's not free, right? Because you have to attend to it. It actually has a cost. So the price of free is the wrong price. Let me give you an example of this. Just you tell me what you think about this. One of the things I've done recently with my daughter and her husband mostly, and a bunch of professors, is start this Peterson Academy. And we have an online social media element to that, which tracks about 15,000 regular users. And we keep a pretty close eye on it. And we refunded the money of 10 of our students because they were causing trouble on the social media platform. 10 out of 15,000. That's all. And it markedly improved in their absence. And so, there's an interesting dynamic there. We don't know what online anonymity does. We don't know what free communication does when the actual price isn't zero. It certainly serves the parasites extraordinarily well. And we are learning that bad information is easier to generate and spread than good information, right? None of this is personal, right? None of this really, I know we've already talked about the fact that all of this, what would you say, edgy conversation can be monetized and used to attract attention.
Yuval Harari expands on that point very well, that when we can generate a lot more information, the majority of it's going to be garbage. It's much more high cost to produce quality information that is accurate. Making up bullshit, lying, doing lazy work, that's much easier. So the internet will get flooded with that kind of low quality information, especially as the value of information drops. When there's the attention so divided and there's, fuck it, you get my point. Let's keep going.
Attention towards bad actors. Let's leave that aside. I agree with that completely. I think it's appalling. But there are structural problems here that are even deeper. And I think, anonymity is a huge problem. But then also I think, what the hell are we going, what kind of world would we define and live in rapidly if every bloody thing that you had to say online was verified with a digital identity? I mean, they've taken a lot of steps in that direction in China. That doesn't look very good to me.
Well, I think the structural problems run even deeper because I agree with everything you said about the effect of free and the effect of anonymity. And I draw two lessons from your experience with your online forum. One is that having it behind a paywall made it much cleaner than it otherwise would have been. You only found 10 people you had to kick out to clean the whole thing up. But the other point is that those 10 people can really have an outsized toxic influence on a larger culture. So I think we want social media platforms that draw that kind of lesson. But it's not just anonymity, and it's not just people who are grifting or otherwise incentivized to be liars or spreaders of misinformation. There are people who, with reputations, you would think they would want to protect. I mean, people with real, the biggest possible reputations and the biggest possible careers, who, in the presence of social media, have gone properly nuts. And I would, put as patient zero for this contagion, Elon Musk, right? I mean, Elon has, I've witnessed a complete unraveling of the person I knew, and I believe I knew him fairly well, under the pressure of extraordinary fame and wealth, but really kind of weaponized by his addictive entanglement with Twitter. I mean, he was so addicted to Twitter that he needed to buy it so that he could just live there, right? I mean, Twitter was his whole life before anyone heard about his impulse to buy it, or anyone heard about his concern about the woke mind virus. I mean, before COVID, he had gone off the deep end into Twitter being everything.
How do you know this? Like, I'm not.
I know this because I was his friend at the time, and I was there, in his very close social circle when.
I've never used Twitter. When Sam talks about Twitter, I have an emotional bias for some reason to believe him. And maybe for the same reason that I'm the personality type that didn't use it to begin with. If anyone uses Twitter and has firsthand experience and thinks Sam's point about his points in general about Twitter are bullshit, comment. I'd be interested in hearing.
Twitter was causing obvious problems for his life and his businesses when he would tweet, 420, funding secured, right? And the SEC, raised the offices of Tesla and seizes everyone's computer, right? I mean, that was he was screwing up his life through Twitter, and yet it was unthinkable that he would get off of it. So potent a drug was it for him.
Let me ask you about that. Let's think about this biologically again. One of the ways you could define addiction is as the pursuit of positive emotion that's bound to a very short time frame. So you get addicted when you optimize positive emotion over a very short time frame. So for example, the addictive propensity of cocaine is dependent on the dose, but also the rate of administration. So the reason that snorted cocaine or injected cocaine is more potent than the same dose of swallowed cocaine is because it crosses the blood-brain barrier faster and raises the dopaminergic pitch quicker. So there's rate and
also there's the reward component appears to correlate subjectively, not with the peak in actual pleasure of the resulting stimulus, but in the peak of the expectation that the pleasure is about to arrive.
Yeah. Well, the dopaminergic system is an expectation system. And cocaine. Okay. So here's what we have with social media, with the bots, with the AI algorithm optimizers, right? So this is what's happening. You see it happening to YouTube too, is that the systems are optimized to grip attention. but the battle is for shorter and shorter, what would you say? For shorter and shorter durations of attentional focus. So the battle is not only for attention, but for the shortest possible amount of information that will grip the maximum amount of attention. Now, the AI systems are using reinforcement learning to determine how to optimize that. And that's driving that fragmentation. Like you can see it on YouTube, because YouTube is tilted more and more towards shorts, like TikTok, right? These fragmentary bursts of maximally attractive information. And they could capitalize on rage, because rage has a positive.
I think one of my unusual personality traits is the shorts format never attracted me at all. Like, this is not an example of me noticing something about algorithms having a negative effect and avoiding it on purpose. I have never been drawn to the shorts format. I've never used TikTok at all. On my personal channel, just the Mercury Black YouTube channel I have, I've posted about 500 shorts. Most of them are wildlife videos, like me feeding chipmunks and squirrels and groundhogs. I also did a couple short animations. I did that to send out some positive energy into the world, but I don't actually watch shorts myself. In fact, if somebody else who's into that short form content wants to share something with me, I will watch one or two, but if someone wants to sit down and watch a whole bunch of their favorite shorts together, just the format annoys me. My brain doesn't like jumping from thing to thing like that. My brain wants to get into something deeper. And even if it's not like a lecture or a podcast, even if it's totally for entertainment purposes, my brain wants a television show or a movie that it can dive into. I've never been susceptible to the short form content. Is that extremely unusual? It seems to me like a lot, especially younger generation, are very into the short form. And if you consume it and you're willing to share, if you're mindful about it and observe how short form content affects you, is it positive, negative, a mix of both, or neutral? I'd appreciate comments, because I'm interested in other people's views on things.
Emotion element. Now, I want to put this into the context of what you said about Twitter, and you and I could have a conversation about X and Twitter that's personal as well. So you said, Elon got hooked on X and enough to buy it. And so let's assess that situationally and biologically. Now, I've spent quite a bit of time on X. In fact, it's the social media platform that I've used personally the most. It's the one I'm most familiar with. And I would say it's been a very complex platform for me.
Yeah, hasn't it at various points convinced you that you should no longer use it? Haven't you gotten on and off?
Multiple times. So
I learned that lesson exactly once, but it really did stick. I have not looked.
Yeah, well, that's partly what I want to talk to you about. I mean, so part of it is, I get a lot of my podcast guests and my ideas for podcast guests from X, because I follow about 2,000 people. But I'm very extroverted, and there's an element of impulsivity that goes along with extroversion. I'm very verbally fluent, and so I can think up new ideas in no time flat, and I'm likely to say them. And so it's very easy for me, if I'm on X, to react to a lot of things.
Yeah.
And so
foot, meat, mouth.
Well, but it's weird. It's a weird thing, because some of the things that, some of my impulsive moves, so to speak, which have got me in quite a lot of trouble, I'm not the least bit unhappy about. You cannot believe how much flack I got for tweeting out something arguably careless on October 8th.
What was that? I not being on Twitter, I never saw that. What was the
I think I said, give him hell, Netanyahu.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, right. So that took like.
Okay, so I don't know what his defense is going to be, but Peterson has always said, choose your words so carefully. Peterson has always said, hell is real, and we need to avoid hell. So even if he wanted to express support for one side, the phrasing, give them hell, comes across very badly coming from Jordan Peterson. Really? Give them hell? That's what you want? More hell on earth? You couldn't have said that in a better way?
8 months of cleanup work to deal with. Yeah. Seriously, it was no, it was, and I got kicked off X.
Yeah, you're not going to get any dispute from me about that. I mean, Netanyahu, just to close the loop on that, Netanyahu is obviously a very polarizing figure and probably a fairly corrupt figure, and he's got lots of problems that have implications for Israeli politics. But I'm not convinced that even the perfect prime minister who has no optical problems, you judge from our side, would have waged this war any differently. I mean, I don't know what they should have done differently at every stage along the way. I don't know that any other prime minister would have taken a different path.
Well, the situation to me looks like, and you tell me what you think about this, and then we'll go back to the problem of AI optimization of grip of short-term attention and the manner in which X in particular falls into that category. So my sense with the situation in Israel has been right from the beginning that Iran in particular would and has set up the situation. So if every single Palestinian was sacrificed in the most torturous possible manner to irritate, annoy, and destroy Israel and agitate the Americans, that would be 100% all right with Iran.
I think
Okay,
someone
well,
once
so
said that the mullahs in Iran will fight Israel to the last Arab. I think that's the line that captures
yeah.
it.
Well, that's exactly okay. That's exactly how it looks to me. And so I look at that situation and I say, well, like, what do you do in a situation like that that's moral if you're Israel? Anyways, I don't want to go down that rabbit hole too deeply. But okay. But so I've had this like complex relationship with X, and some of it's been real useful because I follow a lot of people there and I keep an eye on the mainstreams of the culture and I extract out my podcast guests and I can see where the real pathology is emerging and I can keep an eye on it. And the price of that is that, now and then I stick my foot in it in a major way, and sometimes that's good and sometimes it's not. And now I've sort of built a variety of fences around me.
I wonder if Peterson has been trained for divisive behavior without him noticing it. So Peterson first became famous not because of his fans, but because of his critics. He had remarked on Joe Rogan once that he has figured out how to monetize social justice warriors. It seems to me that every time Peterson's gotten into trouble by upsetting people, it has looked difficult for him at first, but in the long run has garnered support from the opposing side. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think that when he has these big controversies, it probably increases his income. I bet you he gets more Patreon support. I bet you his views go up, even with controversy. And so I wonder if he's been trained to be more offensive without him realizing it.
That are part of my organization that, they're kind of these intermediary structures that we've been talking about that put a lag in between what I read and how I respond, Well, that's one, and this is it's the destruction of those things that you and I are starting to talk about here. Because, there's never been a time in human history where you could publish your first pass opinion about anything to 20 million people in 1 second, right? No one could ever do that. And we're not neurologically constructed to live in a world where you can yell at 10 million people whenever you want about anything.
Yeah, the problem for me is that what's happening now, going back to this core topic of what in particular is wrong with X, and it's the time course at which people are reacting to information and producing information in turn. There's a lot wrong with that, and it's what it's done to our culture and what it's done to specific people. I mean, again, Elon for me is the enormous, the 800-pound canary in the coal mine. Is that it's effectively made them behave like psychopaths. I'm not saying, if you just look at X, and this is what convinced me to get off of it, you would think there were many more psychopaths in the world than there are. In fact, I was seeing people who I knew in every other context would be psychologically normal, or at least normal enough, behave like psychopaths to me, toward me, in front of me. And in some cases, these are people I actually knew. There's some cases, people I had dinner with, and I knew what I was seeing on X would have been impossible across the table from me at dinner.
What if I told you there's a tiny nutrient orphan along with your
Don't generalize to the outside environment, isn't it? Like, right.
And
well, that's an interesting definition of a pathological sub-environment, isn't it? Like, you can tell a family is pathological when the rules that apply in the family don't generalize to the outside world. And you're pointing out that the game dynamics of Twitter have that aspect. Is that the game that's being played in Twitter doesn't suit the world well. It's not an iterable game in the world. And it could easily be the fact that it maximizes for short-term emotional reactivity is exactly what gives it that psychopathic edge, because the definition of a psychopath in many ways is the person who will sacrifice the future and you for immediate gratification, right? That's the pathology of psychopathy as a form of extended immaturity.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of aggressive immaturity on display on X. And again, Elon is one of the primary offenders. The one instance for me that made this especially clear, and the role played by X especially clear, was when he jumped up on stage during one of these campaign events, or I forget if it was campaign or I guess the election had already been won, but some event with Trump, and Elon, quite famously, quite infamously, did what appeared to be a Nazi salute twice to the crowd, and got a reaction from much of the world of horror and insult. And
okay, so that I have heard people discussing, and I have seen the footage, I think, of what he's talking about. I'm curious how other people took it. I'm just talking about how I experienced it, not what is objectively true. When I watched it, it seemed to me obviously not an attempt at that salute. It seemed like he was trying to say, my heart goes out to you. And it seemed so obvious to me that my first impression of people saying that it's obviously a dog whistle to racists was that they probably weren't. It didn't seem genuine to me. It seemed like it was so obviously not that they were intentionally misinterpreting it and pretending that it seemed like it was really the racist salute just to be able to dunk on somebody. So am I wrong about that? Did anyone watching see that and think he was actually doing a racist salute? Or did it come across the way it did to me, that that was unintentional and he was just trying to say my heart goes out to you?
Now, honestly, as his former friend and as somebody who just imagines his worldview has not, fully disintegrated into a tissue of weird internet memes, it was impossible for me to believe that he was sincerely announcing his solidarity with the project of Nazism by making those salutes. Right? So I didn't view those as Nazi.
Oh, also, it sucks ass that we let that physical movement be associated with Nazism. Like, there is only so many kinds of like motions we can make. Like, there's the Black Power and the this and the that. That salute is actually quite dynamic. It would, if it wasn't associated with that and instead was, for example, perhaps if we considered that just a sign of support, the equivalent of silent applause, so that somebody could keep speaking, but people could show their support for what they're saying, I think that's a dynamic gesture. And I think it's unfortunate we've associated it with the Nazi movement. Also, the swastika is a wonderful symbol. It's a very basic symbol that's aesthetically pleasing and has a certain energy to it, and it was an older sun symbol, and a variety of cultures used it. The fact that we allowed, despite all the horrors and atrocities they committed, they've also destroyed some things long term. We can't use that hand gesture, we can't use that symbol anymore, or even the Charlie Chaplin mustache, which I'm not particularly a fan of or anything, but if someone else did want that facial hair, why is the Charlie Chaplin mustache now considered the Hitler mustache? Or you can't name a kid Adolf anymore. That's a cool ass name if it wasn't associated with him. I think it's unfortunate how many of those things the Nazis co-opted and made unusable in other parts of culture.
Nazi salutes, even though just ergonomically they were in fact Nazi salutes. I just thought, okay, I don't know what he's doing, but the idea that he's picking this moment to say I'm a Nazi seems frankly impossible. So I was interested to see what he was going to do in response to the controversy. What he did in response, and again, this controversy is coming in a context that doesn't look at all good for my very charitable interpretation of his behavior, because it's in a context where he's funding the far-right party in Germany, assuring us that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that party, whereas the party does in fact contain whatever Nazis there are to be contained in Germany. Not that it's only a Nazi party, but it is in addition to everything else, it's got the Nazis. He's playing footsie with lots of fairly aggressive anti-Semites on his own platform. He's with great fanfare. He had brought back Nick Fuentes and Kanye, and these people are anti-Semites, if not actual Nazis. So he is facilitating a very unhappy recrudescence of anti-Semitism on the platform he owns, and now he's doing Nazi salutes in public. So what is a genuinely not anti-Semitic, well-intentioned person who cares about his reputation and is still capable of embarrassment do in the aftermath of this? Well, it would have been just trivially easy for him to have said something totally sensible and apologetic that would have been honest and would have taken the sting out of the moment perfectly. He could have said, listen, I know how that looked. I don't know what I was doing up there. I was just captured by the energy of the moment. Obviously, I was not doing a Hitler salute. I'm not a Nazi. I've got no interest in amplifying their message on X or anywhere else. If you're a Nazi, please don't follow me. I hate your whole project. You're completely wrong about everything, right? End of tweet, right? He did nothing like that. All he
Okay, I'm not anti-Semitic. I'm not a Nazi. I'm not racist. For anyone who's coming across me for the first time, those of you who know me, that's very clear. But on top of that, though, I am really trying to love everyone. I've done a lot of agapic meditation, and Christ said to love your enemies. So I actually, because Sam has lived out what he's saying Elon should do in a different way. So he's saying Elon should say, there could be Nazis listening to me, fuck off, don't listen to me. And Sam Harris, when he found out that a significant amount of his audience were fans of Trump, he went out of his way to push them out of his audience. And that is something I don't see why Sam does it or why he would recommend that to Elon. Now, I think the Nazi ideology is incredibly damaging, both outwardly, but also inwardly. I don't think that's good for people. I don't think racism is good for your own soul or psyche, but I'm not going to tell anyone to fuck off and get out of my audience. even if I disagree with them extremely, as long as they are not behaving badly in my community, I don't care how badly their ideas mismatch in some directions, because if we tell those people to fuck off, we're going to radicalize them more. We're making them feel more isolated from society. They'll become more defensive. On the other hand, there's that guy, I forget his name. Maybe it's Daryl something, but there's this black guy who went around trying to make friends with members of the Ku Klux Klan. So I think he would like actually go to Ku Klux Klan meetings even and introduce himself to Klan members and offer to take them out to dinner. So that's the opposite of saying fuck off if you're racist. This guy was like, hey, if you're racist, can I try taking you out to dinner and let's just see what happens? And apparently that dude, like, he's fucking awesome. I wish I could remember his name, because that dude collects Klan hoods now. He has gotten so many people out of the Klan by being nice and loving to them and making them realize that black people aren't what they thought that they are, that he has gotten Ku Klux Klan members to quit, and they give him their hoods as they quit, and he's gathered a collection of them. So I don't understand. Why do we want those people to fuck off? Why don't we want them to hear your points on honesty? Why don't we want them to hear the other perspective that you would rather that they have? Why are we telling anyone to fuck off if they want to listen to your thoughts and want to challenge their own confirmation bias?
Did was troll his audience, making Nazi jokes and puns on X. So you can fault his character for that, but what I also think we should fault is the media.
Now, yeah, I agree. You don't like encourage that kind of shit, but yeah, I think that's clear.
Medium itself, right? This is the way his brain is conforming to the technology. Yes.
Well, look, you know the fundamental attribution error. It's like the one thing social psychologists have discovered that's actually valid. That's a bit of an exaggeration. But the fundamental attribution, yes, it does things. The fundamental attribution error is the proclivity to attribute to character what's actually a consequence of situation. In these, we should be very careful, and I think we are at the moment, be very careful to assure that our first presumption is that it's the pathology of the technology that's the fundamental driver.
Well, yeah,
and that people are
to be clear,
along in it.
That's my account of what has happened to Elon almost in its entirety. I think Twitter has, he is the greatest living casualty of what Twitter does to someone who becomes properly engorged by it. And that's, so, but, and one of the reasons why I got off, frankly, was apart from my own misadventures on the platform, which were nothing like Elon's, I looked in the kind of the funhouse mirror of what was happening to him in his life. And I thought, here's a very smart guy who's got much better things to do than fuck up his life in this way. And yet he can't seem to stop. How much am I like him? How much is there this component of addiction and dysregulation and failures of impulse control and a need to just, get my thoughts out on a time course of seconds rather than more carefully, over the course of days. And so then I yanked it for that reason. And the one thing I found is that when you don't have it as an outlet, right, when you literally can't publish that quickly, then things have to survive a much larger informational half-life. So then there's this thing online that happened that I'm tempted to react to. It has to survive until I do my next podcast, which might not be for 3 or 4 days, right? And so, and obviously 90% of the things I thought I had to react to don't survive that time course.
Yeah, I made a deal with my wife that was like that because, I can see things going sideways, I think, with a fair degree of accuracy, and that disrupts me emotionally now and then. And I made a deal with my wife several years ago that I can't complain about anything I won't write about. Right. Well, it's the same thing, and it bears on the same issue that you're describing. Is that if it's not important enough to write about, then you should ignore it. Right? You're not actually. It's not significant enough. It's not significant enough to sacrifice some genuine time and thought. You shouldn't be commenting on it. And that's kind of a maturity, but it's also it's a weird thing because it's not exactly like. It isn't something that people had to contend with previously because you couldn't publish immediately. There were barriers of cost and difficulty and gatekeepers and distribution. And so that wasn't something you had to think up for yourself. Like, how do I put a lag in my life before I communicate with 1 million people or 5 million people? And so you're basically building these inhibitory structures out of whole cloth. And now you pulled out of Twitter quite a while ago now. It's a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
2.5 years, something like that. Yep.
Well, at least he didn't get Twitter pregnant. He pulled out.
Well, it was actually right when Elon took it over, but it wasn't because he took it over. I mean, the timing there was fairly accidental. I was getting ready to pull the plug, and then I just saw how much chaos it was being introduced into his life around it, and I just thought, all right, this is a sign. And so I yanked it, and I mean, one of the benefits, apart from just introducing this different time course into my life by which I interact with information, I just don't like, there's this phrase, that Twitter isn't real life, and then at a certain point, many of us realize, okay, that's too sanguine a thought, because we're noticing people losing their reputation so fully that they get on an airplane, I think it was the Justine Sacco incident, where she got on an airplane and half the world was tweeting about her, and she arrived at her destination only to find that she had been properly canceled and lost her job, et cetera, et cetera. So obviously Twitter can, whether you're on it or not, it can under the right circumstances or the wrong ones, become real life. But the truth is, given the platform I've built, given just frankly how lucky I've been to find an audience and to build up a readership and a podcast listenership, Twitter really isn't real life for me, right? Elon still attacks me on Twitter by name, and I find out I'm trending on Twitter, years after I've left, and it matters not at all for my life. It matters not at all for my business. Nothing.
By the way, quick comment on Sam Harris's platform. He will say that he's got the paywall stuff because he needs to generate revenue, but that if he doesn't want money to be the reason that you can't access his material. I think that's fantastic that he put that out there. And for anyone who wonders if that's true, it's absolutely true. I've done it multiple times. And there's no fucking jumping through hoops or even explaining yourself. All you have to say is, I would like to request free membership, and you will get your free membership in a couple hours, and you can do it over and over and over again. He's also said, and I think this is great about the audience he's cultivated, he said that the audience members who do pay for it, not only are they not bothered, some people get it for free, but they like the idea that they're, in a way, giving like a scholarship to people, that the money they contribute to Sam's project also allows some people to access it for free. So I think that's a great thing Sam did. It's genuine. It's easy. If you are interested in getting past his paywalls, but you don't have the money for it, or even just the money would stop you, yet you would do it for free, there's the button right there. You click it and you just send an email. You don't need to explain in any length. And you will get, it seems to me, they just automatically approve that shit very quickly.
It happens, right? And yet, if I were on Twitter, there would be this illusion of emergency, right? If I was on there looking at it and looking at the biggest, literally the biggest bully on Twitter has just punched me in the face, and I'm seeing the aftermath of it, the temptation to respond to that and to make and to feel that not only do I have to respond there, but I have to respond to my podcast, and then now this is how I'm spending my week because this thing just happened on Twitter. It would be almost impossible not to be taken in by that, and not to be just convinced of the necessity of it, because all of this is really important. We're talking about millions of people. Literally, there are videos denigrating me for things I've never said or believed that Elon has amplified, and these videos have 50 million views, right? And I just happen to be lucky enough to have built a life and a career where that matters not at all, right? But for somebody else finding themselves in that situation, I can well imagine, all right, this is the destruction of my reputation in a way that matters. And
well, that's what it looks like, sure. And like you said, it's virtually impossible to resist that temptation. I mean, who are you to deny the impact of the opinion of 50 million people? You know what I mean? I mean, that looks like an insane pride in a way to ignore that. But the point that you're making is that it's very difficult to
well, it's very easy to ignore it when it actually isn't making contact with my views, right? It's like if I had said
right, but it's hard to see that it isn't, like, because it appears so powerful. We found as a social media platform that Twitter is the worst of all social media platforms for sales conversion.
Yeah, I can imagine.
In our experience.
That's because you're next to somebody getting beaten to death in a liquor store. I mean, like when I go on Twitter, since I don't have an account, so I have a naive account. It's not following anyone, and I almost never click anything. So I really see the pure algorithm when you just look at the homepage scroll, or as pure as it gets. I mean, maybe it's got some information on me based on my IP address or something. But if I ask myself, what is this algorithm trying to get me to be or to believe? Honestly, I can tell you that it is trying to get me to be a racist asshole, right? It's any fan of Elon's, right? So it's giving me a lot of Elon, and then it's giving me a lot of like black teenagers beating up white, a single white teenager, or people of color robbing stores and getting shot in the face. I mean, it's just awful, like 4chan.
For people who doubt the influence of that on their own mind, Daniel Schmachtenberger, who's an incredibly intelligent person, performed an experiment on himself once. I heard him talk about. So I think what he did was he created, I believe it was Facebook. If not, it was somewhere else. I'll just say it was Facebook. So he makes a Facebook account and watches a bunch of videos of police brutality, and looks at a bunch of, punk rock memes, anti-police and defund the police and that. And he said that after he checks out a bunch of those, the algorithm picks up on that's what's going to get his attention, and it begins to be all it shows him. He doesn't even have to search it. He said that watching that stuff, like going through Facebook every day, once he's convinced that he's that kind of person, he noticed, even though he was doing an experiment to see how it would affect him, which you'd think might reduce the effect on him, he noticed that after a month of watching those, when he saw police in public, he began to get a negative emotion about police. Then what he did was made a new Facebook account, and he did the opposite. He looked up all the videos of, the friendly policeman saving somebody or getting a cat out of a tree. He watched, he clicked on memes supporting police or, shit like that. And he said after a month of watching that, when he saw a policeman in public, he felt positive about them. So this shit has real effect on our minds. And that's why I don't use any social media, and I don't expose myself to any algorithms choosing content for me or suggesting it even outside of YouTube. So YouTube does suggest things to me, but also because I'm aware that that algorithm has influence on me, if there was some thing I felt like looking up, but I feel isn't good for me overall, it's like, yeah, I'm going to look up this one conflict-based thing, but I'm also aware the human brain's susceptible to that. I don't want it suggested to me at any time that I don't go out of my way to watch it. That kind of shit I will watch in incognito mode. Sometimes it's just political shit. Sometimes it's like if there's something about the war or something I want to look into. But it's like, I don't want that being shot up as clickbait. I watch it on incognito. So I'm sort of training my algorithm that affects me by being careful what I watch in my account. And so when I go to YouTube, it suggests long form podcasts, it suggests lectures, it suggests music, it will suggest kind of science fiction stuff, and it will suggest, the toy channels, because I'm a nerd who collects 80s vintage toys. And those are all things that if I go on and I get sucked in, like I spend longer on YouTube than I wanted to, and I spend 3 hours watching a podcast, or I listen to punk music for 3 hours, or I watch some old Twilight Zone episodes, I'm fine with that. Like, that's not damaging to me. But I don't want to get sucked into hours of violence or divisive material. So I watch that shit on incognito to keep my YouTube algorithm behaving. And aside from that, I don't have any algorithm affecting me, like not even a Netflix algorithm suggesting content. I use the kind of streaming sites that don't use any algorithm at all. The suggestions under a movie are entirely based on the title. And so if I watch Friday the 13th Part 3, it'll suggest like a kid's movie Part 3. It'll just suggest all these Part 3 movies. So I am intentionally avoiding algorithms affecting my mind.
Level awfulness, and then the occasional unlucky brand advertising to me in that context. I mean, it's a monstrosity of a platform from which to actually try to sell things. So but yes, if I were on Twitter following 2,000 smart people as you are, and feeling that they are curating for me the best of their information diet, I would have I know what that experience is like, because that's what I was doing. That's why I was on it for 12 years and couldn't convince myself to get off it. It seemed like a professional necessity. It seemed so good in the sense, the incoming stuff was so good because, again, I had chosen who to follow, and all these people were reading great articles and forwarding them and having great short takes on them, and it was, all that stuff was great. But I have managed to get a surrogate of that in the way I find information otherwise. And what I don't have is the emergency. Like, I mean, the ruined vacation where somebody, some genius over at the New York Times has called me a racist, and now I have to, spend the rest of my vacation with my family trying to figure out how to respond to this. I've tweeted back at them and blah, 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 blah. It's escalated, and now we've just nuked each other. And
it looks real.
Yeah, it looks real, but it feels real, and it is real if you spend your time that way. And that's the thing. If you spend your time that way, which I did for years, it is real. It is the substance of your life. It is the manner in which it's the thing you bring back to the conversation with your wife, 5 minutes later, or 5 hours later, more likely, and it's in your head. And it was a ghastly use of attention. That's what I finally realized.
There's been some concerning research or
that you were afraid that the sort of things that you were seeing happening to others, more than merely Elon, let's say, in your estimation, were also happening to you. And so what do you think, in retrospect, what do you think it was doing to you? You just talked about the effects on your family on vacations. I've experienced a fair bit of that. I understand exactly what you're saying. And it does seem like the world's burning and you better do something about it right now. And it's no wonder it seems that way, because it's lots of people, and generally in our normative ecosystems, if lots of people appear to be upset with you or around you, you should pay attention. But Twitter isn't the real world. We don't know what the hell it is. It looks more and more like a world of demonic bots, and God only knows what that world is. But what did you see, especially now that you've been away for a while? What elements of your character do you think were pathologized and that were brought to the forefront? That
Well, yeah, so first
because of this.
Yeah, I considered myself a fairly careful user of it. I mean, I was not at all like Elon. I was not, addicted to it in that way. I was not tweeting hundreds of times a day. I think I averaged something like 3 tweets a day over the course of my use of it, and that would come in spurts. I mean, so I would not tweet for 3 days and then send out a dozen tweets, because it was some hot topic. I was always fairly careful, so that I honestly don't think I ever said anything on the platform that I regretted. Right? I mean, if I ever made a mistake, I apologize for it. But I never, I treated it like writing. I was aware I was publishing in that channel, however quickly and impulsively. I was, I'm enough of a writer and an academic to feel like, okay, this is yet another occasion where embarrassment is possible, and you don't want that. So I don't remember ever really screwing up on the platform. And yet, what happened there was, I can honestly say that for a decade, the worst things in my life, and in some sense, the only bad things in my life, came from Twitter, came from my interaction with Twitter. I mean, apart from like family illnesses, I guess leaving that aside.
Anyone else experience that?
My life was so good, and yet I had this, digital serpent in my pocket that I would consult a dozen times a day, 20 times a day, maybe 100 times a day. So I might have only posted once or twice, but if something was really, if the news cycle was really churning, I might be looking at this. My consulting of this newsfeed effectively was interrupting my day. Not just every hour, but maybe every 5 minutes of many hours, right? Or for 10 minutes of that hour, and so it was segmenting my day. However good that or productive that day was or should have been, I was constantly chopping it up by how I was engaging with this scroll. Again, mostly consuming, but often in response to the 1 or 2 things I put out. Yes, there was a dopaminergic component to that. Obviously, I said something that I thought was clever, that was perceived as clever by my fans, and perhaps to the detriment of my enemies, and all that seemed, exactly what I wanted in the moment. But even when it was at its best, right? Even when there was just good information coming to me, and I was responding happily with good information back, even the non-toxic version of it was a style was intrinsically fragmenting of my life. It's like I don't pick up. I don't read a book that way. I don't have a book that I pick up for 2.5 minutes and then I put down and then try to have a conversation with my kid and then say, okay, hold on 1 second, and pick up the book again. It's like that's not how anyone reads a book, right? And yet Twitter far too often became that sort of thing in my life.
Right.
And
it's like a parasite. It's like it parasitizes the exploratory
right.
instinct. It's something like that, right? Because and maybe look, for a long time, I didn't have a cell phone. I was a late adopter.
I'd stated that I was very critical of newer Peterson, and I had tuned out from him for a couple years. And definitely, he said some offensive stuff and has demonstrated behavior that I really wasn't impressed with, because I felt like it pushed away people who might have benefited from his psychological work. But he's doing great in this conversation overall. However, that's kind of a softball because Sam's an old friend of his, and Sam is very hard to get in an argument with. And Sam certainly doesn't have the mannerisms that get you hyped up and angry.
Cell phones. And I didn't watch the news probably really from like 1985 till about 2005. I cut myself off from news sources. I didn't read newspapers. And the reason that I didn't do that was because I realized
things happened in there. Did you catch 9/11?
I used to read, for example, I would read some credible magazines like The Economist when it still was credible, because I don't really think it is anymore. But
wasn't it amazing? Isn't it amazing to consider that magazines like Time and Newsweek and could wait a week? Could expect that their audience would wait a week to be informed about the news of that week? That just seems extraordinary to me now.
Well, my conclusion about that was that if it isn't important in a week, it's not important.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And so I substituted these longer lag time news aggregators for TV in particular, or radio. It's like, if it's today's news, it's not news. Maybe if it's not important in a month, it's not news, right? And that's part of that intelligent filtering. And I guess part of the reason that X is dangerous.
We have a limited amount of mental processing power. Do we all want to be thinking about things constantly that are irrelevant 2 days from now? There are so many things that we could think about that will be relevant for the rest of your life.
And social media is dangerous. X in particular is that, that proclivity to forage for information is in general an extremely useful instinct, right? It's the instinct to learn. But what we're learning, you might say that the shorter the period of time over which the information is relevant, the more like pseudo information it is. And so then any system that optimizes for the grip of short-term attention is going to parasitize your learning instinct with pseudo information.
Yeah, it's also,
and the algorithms are going to maximize that.
The half-life is one thing, but also the culture that is informing these algorithms, the actual human behavior that the algorithms are skimming and boosting, is increasingly a bad faith style of conversation. I mean, it's just so many people, especially the anonymous people, are in the misinformation business. I mean, they will just cut together a clip that is designed to mislead, and that is the clip that will gets spread to the ends of the earth.
Well, it's maybe is it designed to mislead, or is it designed to optimize their particular grip on short-term attention for their own aggrandizement? Like the psychopathic move, and let's say that it's facilitated by these short-term attention aggregators that are driven by bots that are learning how to do this. The psychopathic proclivity, the narcissistic proclivity, is going to say whatever puts you at the center of attention, whatever it is. Now, if you're governed by some kind of ethos that is outside of attention seeking, then that's a different story. But the game.
Also notice that if you're governed by that, how easily you're controlled. The more things you want, the easier you are to control.
If the game is that the machine optimizes for short-term attention, then it's going to reward all the players that are doing whatever it takes to grip short-term attention.
Yeah, but the thing is, people, whatever it takes though, is to get somebody seeming to say something totally outrageous. And in context, it might have made perfect sense, or at least be a very different point than the one that's being advertised by the clip. But the clip, shorn of context, is calculated to mislead in that the person who's edited that clip knows that the naive viewer can only draw one conclusion from the utterance as presented, right? And they're not, even if they're well-intentioned and fairly alert to this problem, almost no one is going to go back to the original podcast and look at the comment in context. I mean, this just happened to Rogan, I believe. I think he had Bono, the singer for U2 on his podcast, and Bono said something critical of Elon, I believe, and this got chopped up in a clip that was it made it look like Joe really disagreed with Bono and was critical of him, and the clip just got exported as like look at Bono getting owned by Joe Rogan or whatever. But that's not what the conversation was at all, right? Like Joe conceded, had most of the point that Bono was making. It was false. It was a false picture of what happened there. And the person who makes that clip just knows that if they frame it as a smackdown, people are going to love to see that, and it doesn't matter that they're lying about what happened and damaging people's reputations in the process.
Yeah, well, and that's especially true if they're anonymous and their reputation bears no consequence of their lies. Well, the other thing that's happening, I don't know how much this is happening to you, and this is another example of the parasite problem. So increasingly, my voice and my image are being used not exactly in the way that you're describing, although that's happening a lot.
Yeah, I'm selling cognitive enhancers somewhere as an AI version of myself.
Okay, well,
I'm backing it up because I'm using his image. Look at the thumbnail I put up for this video.
happening. I don't know how much this is happening to you, and this is another example of the parasite problem. So increasingly, my voice and my image are being used not exactly in the way that you're describing, although that's happening a lot.
Yeah, I'm selling cognitive enhancers somewhere as an AI version of myself.
Okay, well, that's happening a fair bit too, and sometimes worse than cognitive enhancers. But it's the worst thing that's happening now is that these sites that are operating under my name, using my image and my voice, are providing
okay, I'm not doing that. I'm not pretending to be him anywhere, but I am using his image combined with AI to make thumbnails that I hope are coming across as trying to be comedic and artistic and not insulting him as a person. So I hope the thumbnails come across right.
pseudo-philosophical content and pseudo-psychological insight as if it's me. And so it's like what I've said has been put through a filter of stupidity and reorganized in my voice. And this is happening constantly. Like YouTube has already taken 65 channels down that are doing this. And so this is another example of that parasite problem, right? You store up a reputation and then the parasites swoop in and pull off the attention that the reputation has garnered and monetize it. And they can escape into the ether because they do it anonymously. And so this is going to become a stunning problem.
I mean, it's a big problem. I can see that, the perfect version of it is at most a year away. I mean, it might only be a couple of months away. We've experimented with this on our side too. Just like, for instance, in my meditation app, Waking Up, we're now experimenting with translation to other languages. And AI's got me speaking 22 languages perfectly in my voice, and it really sounds like me speaking those languages. And the translation, from what we can tell so far, is fairly impeccable. So we're going to roll out a Spanish version of the app in the not too distant future, just to see what happens. But it's like it's getting too good. So I think what the lesson that consumers of information who care to have real information are going to have to learn is that you can't trust, if you're looking at Jordan Peterson on YouTube, you simply cannot trust that it really is Jordan Peterson unless it's coming through one channel that you can trust. So we're back to the age of ironically, we're back to the age of gatekeepers, right? It's not on your channel or Joe Rogan's channel or Chris Williamson's channel. If it just purports to be them, but on somebody else's YouTube account, you can't trust it.
Yeah. Well, it might also be, Sam, that the real solution to that is payment. Like if it's the rule is going to be, maybe this is the rule. The rule is going to be, if it's free, right? If it's free, it's a lie.
Right. Yeah.
That's the world we're rapidly moving into. Or if it's
except
I understand Peterson's point there, but then go back to what I said about Sam, how Sam's kind of in between, but then I'm absolutely on that opposite end that Peterson's talking about, the if it's free, it has no value point. I've heard him make it before. So when I had been doing offering community members private sessions, like doing counseling, mentoring, or doing S prevention, that end of self prevention, I always did that completely free. The reason I did that was because I was not doing it motivated by money. And I was wanting to be like the same way that Sam wanted to be available to the people who actually couldn't afford it or just didn't have so much money that they wanted to spend it on that. I really want to reach out to people who like are at the fucking bottom and are in a ditch somewhere crying and can't find any help. So I always offered all of those services voluntarily. Did any of you from the community back in the day, did any of you get the feeling that me doing that for free was lowering the perceived value of it?
Someone's going to be able to create, until you find them and stop them, someone will create the fake Jordan Peterson Academy that has a paywall, right? That looks like you, sounds like you, and it's only $5 a month. And so they'll monetize that way, and that'll still be the problem.
Has that been happening with your meditation app, with your enterprise yet?
Not that I'm aware of. No, I mean, I just think I'm just aware of seeing short clips of me seeming to hawk psychotropics that I've never heard of, and it's just like an AI version of my voice. It's real footage of me stolen from somebody's podcast, and then an AI workover of that, that turns into like an Instagram ad.
Yeah, well, I talked to some lawmakers in DC about a year and a half ago about the fact that this was going to happen, hoping that they would. Well, it takes a long time to take notice and takes action, but it's essentially the digital equivalent of kidnapping. Like, I think people should be put in prison for a long time for stealing your digital identity and monetizing it. Like, it is very much akin to kidnapping, because what they're doing is they're draining the value out of your reputation.
Okay, they're draining value out of your reputation. That sounds more like a financial crime to me. Whereas kidnapping is an intense crime because you're damaging a sentient being. It is so damaging to somebody. They suffer. Who knows also why you're kidnapping them? That's probably not leading to something good. So there's going to be further crime followed up there. But even if they just kidnap you, fuck with you for a while and let you go again, that could affect you psychologically for your whole life. And to me, there's a huge difference between the kind of crimes where you're causing somebody to suffer and the kind of crimes that are purely financial. So I'm surprised he's making this argument.
That's essentially the game.
I think it should be more like theft or embezzlement type stuff, but not the kind of thing that involves like assault.
And so what's happened to your life? There's a couple of things I'd like to investigate here first. The first is I'd like to return to something that you and I talked about that we wandered around a fair bit in our previous conversations. You had partly because you were concerned about the distinction between good and evil. Don't let me put words into your mouth. You were hoping to find a objective basis for morality, a way of grounding morality in the objective world. And I have a thought about that that's relevant to our current conversation. So tell me if you accept this proposition. Part of the pathology of Twitter is that it operates by game rules that not only don't apply in the real world, but that when exported to the real world, pathologize it. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So here's a way of I think bridging a gap between the way you've been thinking about the world from the moral perspective and the way I've been thinking about it. So, I've always been, I've understood that you had a very deep concern about moral judgment, and that your attempt to provide a scaffolding of objectivity for morality was grounded in that even deeper concern. And I thought that I could understand why you did that. And I didn't agree with the conclusions that you'd drawn, but I agreed with the overall enterprise. And it struck me recently, and I think we've already obliquely made reference to it in our conversation, that there's another way of conceptualizing this relationship between morality and objective fact, and that it might be more fruitful to look into the realm of something like, well, it's like theory of iterability, and generalizability. It's maybe a variant of something like game theory. Like, imagine that.
I think he's
let
going
me
to
give
make
you an example, Sam.
right now.
It's a pretty famous example. Those trading games where behavioral economists sit people down and say, two people, they say, I'll give you $100. You have to make an offer to the, okay.
Yeah.
So the finding across culturally is that people generally approximate a 50%, 50-50 split, right?
Yeah. And they're not game theoretic with respect to unfair trades. Like, they don't want to accept unfair trades, even when it would just narrowly be to their advantage to accept them.
Exactly. Okay. And that's true even if they're poor. So if you put a poor person in a situation where they have to accept an unfair trade, that would be to their immediate.
I have a lot to say about this, but I don't have much time before I have to go. And if I start talking about this, I'll ramble until I have to go. So I'm going to let this one go by.
economic benefit, they seem even less likely to accept it. Now, I think the right way to construe that is that if you and I engage in an economic trade, we're doing two things at the same time. The first is what the classical economist would say is we're trying to maximize our gain, let's say. But the problem with that notion is that we aren't playing one game. Or while we're playing one game, we're also setting ourselves up to play a very large and unpredictable sequence of games. Those are happening at the same time. And so we don't want to just optimize for gain in the single game. We want to optimize our status as players in a large series of unpredictable games. And so we want to put ourselves forward as fair players so that people line up to play other games with us.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so then imagine that the hallmark of morality is something like generalizable iterability across contexts, right? Because this would allow for, and so you could think about a truly moral system is the most playable game, and an immoral system augurs in. And like when we're talking about this to some degree with regard to X, because our proposition is that fundamentally, because it's optimizing for short-term attention grip, and it benefits the psychopaths and the short-term gain accruers, the parasites, and perhaps the predators, that it's fundamentally a non-playable game, and that if its consequences generalize outside the world of X, that it pathologizes the environment. And the reason for that is it's not optimally iterable. And so the pattern of morality that would be grounded in the objective world isn't in the world of objective fact. It's in the world of optimized iterability across people and contexts.
Well, I would just say that there's some set of objective facts that subsumes that picture, right? I mean, the world is the way it is.
Yes.
The social world of social primates such as ourselves is the way it is. It admits of certain possibilities, and certain other things are impossible given the kinds of minds we have. Our minds could change in all kinds of ways. They could change by being integrated with technology. They could change by genetically being manipulated at some point in the future. There's this landscape of possible experience that the right sort of minds could navigate, and we're someplace on that landscape, and we're trying to find our way. And so I view morality as at bottom a navigation problem, right? And it's got this iterative quality that you described. The question is,
I like examining things from multiple frameworks. So I'm not saying this is the right framework, but what Sam's saying right now is a great framework. And it's like, examine something from multiple frameworks you respect. If you're Christian, take a moment to put yourself entirely in your faith and examine a topic. Then go like Richard Dawkins mode and examine it purely from your understanding of the materialistic world. And then examine it from anything else, like maybe if you also really respect Taoism. Then after going through each one individually, step back and look overall at the topic. See where, if something pops up in every single framework you like, that's probably very important and a good thing to act on. If something pops up in like half of them and the other half say the opposite, maybe think about that one more before allowing it to direct your behavior.
it's always, where can we go from here? Where should we go from here? Where should we go from here, given all the possible places we might go from here, both individually and collectively?
Okay, well, the reason that I got obsessed with stories to begin with, Sam, was because I realized 30 years ago that a story was a description of a navigation strategy.
Yeah.
That's what a story is. And so then the question is, okay, let's see if we can formalize this a bit more. The story has to, let's say an optimized story has to iterate and improve. So for example, if you construe your marriage properly, it exists stably, but that's not as good as it could get. It could exist stably and improve as it iterates. And then you can imagine that there's a small world of games that are playable in the actual natural and social world that improve as they iterate. And those games, pointers to that game, those games are moral pointers. And I think that that's what the core of the religious enterprise dives into and elaborates upon. I think that's what makes it the religious enterprise, is that it deeply assesses. So imagine that your proposition you laid out is accurate, is that the fundamental concern is navigation. How do we get from point A to point B? Well, a story, you can think about this and tell me what you think, but I believe that a story is a description of a navigation strategy. If you go see a movie, you infer the aim of the protagonist and you adopt his perceptual frame and his emotional perspective. That's how perception works.
Yeah.
And then you can imagine that there are depths of games, some are shallow, and short-term games that maximize for short-term gain, and to hell with everything else, are shallow. And games that are sophisticated can be played in many situations with many players. They take the future into account and they improve as you play them. And there's a hierarchy of value in consequence of that is obliquely associated with the world of fact, because it has to operate in the world of fact, but that isn't fundamentally derived from like data that's directly associated with the facts.
I'm really seeing the Kermit meme right there, because in comparison to how still Sam is sitting, Peterson really looked like a Muppet there, especially on fast speed. All his elaborate gestures and hands flying around is exactly how Kermit the Frog talks or moves when he's excited.
Well, not operationally, but potentially so. Just not in fact. That's just not. I'm never claiming when I say that there are objective truths to all of these questions, that those objective truths will be delivered by some guy holding a clipboard wearing a white lab coat. But there are things we just know to be true, and it would take a lot of explaining to get to the bottom of how we know them to be true. But I mean, just they're very simple claims. We know that life in the best and most refined and most ethically positive sum developed world context, right? You and me and our most conscientious friends at the nicest resort after having done a great day's work, we're enjoying a great meal and talking and creatively and positively about how to improve the world. We know that's a better game than trying to find some child soldiers to torture the neighbors in some malarial hellhole, in sub-Saharan Africa, and so that we can extract some heavy metals, the extraction of which is polluting the environment and causing the life expectation to be 30 years lower than it is in where we live, right? I mean, so they're fundamentally discordant human projects that are available to some very lucky people and unavailable to others, and luck is by no means evenly distributed in this world. So they're better and worse games, right? By any measure of better, you want to ethically better, artistically better, entrepreneurially better, economically better. It's just better with respect to the health outcomes, et cetera, et cetera. So we're all trying to play the best game we can be a part of. We're all trying. I mean, some people. I take that back. Many of us are. We're all trying to play the best game we can think of as best. But one of the consequences of my argument is that it's possible to be wrong. It's possible to actually have false beliefs about what is in fact better or worse. You can be
I
confused,
also think you're insufficient. You're insufficiently pessimistic too, Sam. I think because I don't think everyone is trying to play the best possible game. I think that there are truly negative games where.
I think people are being rewarded in some way. Like the sadist whose favorite game is to cause suffering in others and enjoy that suffering. The fact that he enjoys their suffering, right? That's a problem with him, right? He's a neurological monster of a sort, and he's confined to being the sort of mind that finds that very low level game more rewarding than the game I just advertised at the resort with us being creative and productive and positive sum.
Yeah, well, that's the man who wants to rule over hell, Sam.
Right. Yeah. So
right,
I'm not saying
because he thinks. Okay. Fine.
But my point is that we're obviously living in a realm where there are better and worse outcomes by any definition of better and worse that makes sense.
Even from within the confines of the games that you're describing.
Yeah.
Right. Because one of the ways of deciding that a game is counterproductive is that if you play it, it doesn't produce the result that it intends. Right. So that's another kind of universal hallmark of moral judgment. Like if you're in.
That's unless it produces an outcome you didn't intend that is actually far better than what you intended. That can go both ways. Peterson's only imagining the downside version.
At something and your strategy doesn't get you there, either your strategy is wrong or your aim is off by your own definition, right? There's no relativizing your way out of that. And then we could say, well, there's a hierarchy of games that.
And he'll also say you never achieve something if you don't aim for it. You've got to aim for it or you'll never achieve it. That's wrong too. Like for instance, I'm I guess a YouTuber now. I never aimed for this. This was a series of events following synchronicities, and I ended up taking over this channel from Andrew. I didn't aim at doing what I'm doing now, and yet I'm doing it. So you can end up places you didn't aim at.
That expand and improve as you play them. And there's a hierarchy of games that degenerate as you play them, even by your own standards of degeneration.
Yeah, and the games, the more refined games actually refine you as a player. I mean, you get changed by the game you play, to your advantage or to your disadvantage, and it makes you more or less capable of playing any specific game. So I mean, this is what learning, this is what education is, this is what skill learning is, this is what interpersonal skill learning amounts to. This is what the difference between having good relationships versus bad relationships, being in a good culture where its institutions incentivize you to be effortlessly be the best possible version of yourself, as opposed to you having to be some kind of moral hero just to be not a psychopath. I mean, this is what's so important about incentives and about contexts like Twitter that incentivize the wrong things. But what we want, I mean, we don't want to have to take on the burden of rebooting civilization ourselves based on our own native moral intuitions every single hour of every single day.
That's for sure, Sam. That's for sure.
We need systems that make it easy for strangers to collaborate effortlessly in high trust environments.
Yeah,
right. I mean, we need to offload all of our moral wisdom into institutions and to systems of incentives such that you would have to be a very bad person indeed not to see the wisdom of being a peaceful, honest collaborator with the next person you meet. Right. In this, given the nature of the system, whereas I mean, if you look, just to sharpen this up because that can sound very abstract. If you take an actually normal, decent person who just wants to be good and have positive some relationships with everyone he meets, you put that person in a maximum security prison in the United States, that person will be highly incentivized to join a gang that has the requisite color of his skin, right, and be essentially a monster, because that's the only way to survive in that context, right? To not join a gang, to not join a racist gang, is to be the victim of everyone, right? So what you have in a maximum security prison is a system of terrible incentives where you have to be some kind of self-sacrificing saint to opt out of ramifying this awful system of incentives further. We want the opposite of that in situations that we control and in institutions that we build. And what the thing that's so disturbing to me about this contrarian moment is that so many people have gotten the message, this is really most explicit since COVID, they've gotten the message that we don't need institutions. We don't want institutions. We just need to burn it all down. And we're just going to navigate by Substack newsletter and podcast.
We need better institutions. He's right, not to destroy them. Basically, what a lot of people are feeling in this moment is, hey, these institutions aren't living up to the fucking values that they preached. Let's burn them down. That can be dangerous. And I know chaos is enticing, but for those of us who are weaker, going into chaos isn't a good idea. Shit, I totally lost my train of thought. What the fuck did he just say?
The thing that's so disturbing to me about this contrarian moment is that so many people have gotten the message, this is really most explicit since COVID, they've gotten the message that we don't need institutions. We don't want institutions. We just...
All right, yeah. So instead, what we need to do is fucking demand of the institutions that they start living up to the standards that they have been preaching. Like, for instance, I'm going to use the metaphor of Captain America. There was an old story after World War II that America was Captain America. No weapon at all, just a shield. Out there, the big hero saving the whole world. And yes, America did not live up to that. But, fuck, like, what should we do? Burn down America or try to hold it to those values and realize it won't make it all the way there, but try to at least get it to set that goal if it's going to claim to be that, and to stumble along improving in that direction. But it's not just better institutions we need, because like we're going through a fucking apocalypse right now. We need better everything. I think the Joker, like the previous one to the newer ones, said something in one point like, this town needs a better class of criminal. We need better at every fucking level. We need better, just average people. We need better institutions. We need better religious people. We need better atheists. We need better fucking criminals. And we need better homeless people and people like at the bottom, the people struggling in crisis. We need every single level to start doing better if we're going to get through whatever kind of massive transformation we're already in the middle of, and that appears like it's going to be accelerated by artificial intelligence to the point that whether we survive it or not, this is an apocalypse in the sense of this is the destruction of one world and the beginning of another. I don't think we're halfway, or I don't think we're approaching the apocalypse. I think we're halfway through it.
We just need to burn it all down, and we're just going to navigate by Substack newsletter and podcast, and that's just not going to work, right? We can't be all contrarian all the time. We need institutional knowledge.
Intermediary institutions.
Yeah, that work. Yeah, so whether we have to build new ones or perform exorcisms on our old ones, that might be a different answer depending on the case. But there's no question we need institutions that are better than most individuals, and that make most individuals live up to norms that they themselves didn't invent and would, under another system of incentives, would struggle to emulate.
All right, I'm going to bring it in to land, Sam. I think what we're going to do on the Daily Wire side, I want to talk to you, I think, for half an hour about the anti-Semitic landscape on the left and the right. And I want to go down those rabbit holes and explore them with you. So that's, for everybody watching and listening, I think that's what we're going to do on the Daily Wire side. And because you made some comments earlier.
For anyone watching, Peterson now is putting up a paywall for the rest of the conversation. So I'm curious about two things. One, if you have watched this and you pay for the paywall and saw the end part, let us all know. And two, if you did not pay to get past the paywall, would you have watched it if it was available free on YouTube, or would you tune out before it? So like basically I'm asking, how many more people would it have reached if there wasn't the paywall? And is anyone watching someone who gets past that paywall?
Earlier about your concerns about the right-wing parties in Europe, for example, and the Nazis that are hiding there. And I've seen no shortage of right-wing anti-Semitism rear its ugly head, let's say, on X, for example. But I also want to talk to you about the same pathology emerging on the left, because there's no shortage of unbelievable anti-Semitism on the left, and we should sort that out a little bit. And so that's what we'll do on the Daily Wire side. Sam, every time we talk, I think we get a little bit well, we understand each other a little bit better.
Yeah,
You know, I think there's something very fruitful for us to continue discussing in relationship, well, to a number of the things you discussed today about the necessity for intermediary institutions. That's the principle of subsidiarity. It's an ancient principle of Catholic social, what would you say, social philosophy. You have to have intermediary institutions. They're the alternative to tyranny and slavery. The idea that there's a harmony between individual development and proper institutions that has to be established. You know, you can't be it's very difficult to be a good person in an entirely pathological social situation. And then this idea that there's a hierarchy of games, because part of what got me interested to begin with in the religious world, let's say, was because I started to understand what constituted the religious as the structure of the depth of games. It's by definition. I'm not talking about what people think about as superstitious belief. That's not the issue. The issue is that there's a hierarchy of game, from shallow to deep, from counterproductive to productive, from unplayable to iterative, and that's a real world. And there's a reason for that I think is allied with your desire, lifelong desire, to investigate the objective grounds of the moral world.
Yeah, I mean,
there's
one thing I would add to that is that also by definition, on my account, whatever's true there, whatever's truly sacred, you know, the true spiritual possibility has to be deeper than culture, and it certainly has to be deeper than the accidents of ancient cultures being separated from one another based on linguistic and geographical barriers, right? So it can't be
no dispute about that.
Yeah, it can't be that Eastern Orthodox Christianity is the real answer versus Hinduism being, you know, the real answer. Because I mean, one, they're incompatible answers at the surface level. Whatever deep truth they may be in touch with, that is something we have to understand in a 21st century context that is deeper than provincialism. That's my argument against religious sectarianism of any kind.
We definitely have much to discuss the next time we talk. All right, so for everybody watching and listening, join us on the Daily Wire side, because we'll go down the anti-Semitic rabbit circle to talk to you.
Okay, I made it through the whole thing. I did have enough time. So some of you may have noticed that this was a lot lazier than I would typically have done in the past. When I was live streaming in the past, I was paying full attention to the live stream. And I'm back over now, so I can see comments come up. I don't know when I'll have to leave. I might have to leave just suddenly at one point. Okay, yeah, I will have to leave in about 10 minutes. Also, I had done one video with ChatGPT that I posted, and in that video, what I was doing is I was just playing video games and talking to ChatGPT, and then I decided, like, oh fuck, why don't I try recording this, and maybe it will be interesting content. That is obviously much lazier content when I'm doing a video with ChatGPT. What I was just doing right now was obviously lazier. Like, I was having my coffee, I was checking messages, I was only partially paying attention at times. And I did record a couple other conversations with ChatGPT that I have just not edited yet and put up. But while I will totally see, like, that's fucking lazier. The reason I'm doing it I'm experimenting with doing it this way is I have chronic fatigue from long COVID. That's part of why I was gone for so long. My energy level is low. And first of all, if I think to myself, okay, am I going to do a video and it's just going to be me? Or I think, do I want to try doing a video and it's me and ChatGPT? Doing it with ChatGPT lowers my resistance. So it makes it more likely that I try recording something. Also, when I do it with ChatGPT, like, yeah, it's fucking lazy. I can get halfway through a point and then say to GPT, okay, check the internet and finish that point for me, or pull up the proper quote. And I can ramble about things without trying to be too accurate. I can just kind of riff for a few minutes with like the half memories, because also my brain is damaged from long COVID and I have fuzzier memories. I can just riff for a minute and then say to ChatGPT, okay, double check that for false information. Or I'll just say, I remember this. Was that total fucking misinformation, or was there something to that? And ChatGPT will like fill that out for me. So it makes it much easier to do the video. And then also at the end of doing the video, I'm less drained mentally and emotionally. So it's much easier for me to do videos if I work with ChatGPT. I can understand plenty of reasons to criticize doing that. But that's my thinking of why I'm going to experiment with that going forward. If you hate that, tell us why. I'm interested in the reasons why this is a bad idea. It's like I said, it's an experiment. So I want feedback. I don't want confirmation bias. If you like it, let me know, and let me know why. If you dislike it, let me know and let me know why, and then you're participating in the experiment. Also, so far I have, because I didn't know how ChatGPT would behave fully yet. I'm very new to using it. So that's why I recorded the first couple instead of just going live. I think they went well enough that I could just go live with ChatGPT if people are interested. So anyone who makes it to this point in the video, if you give me feedback on that, like, first of all, I try to respond to every comment that like needs a response. Sometimes I'll just click the heart if someone's just saying, hey, I liked this and nothing further. But if you give me reasons why, if you give me questions or take the time to explain your view on things, I absolutely read all the comments. Also, I'm starting to feed them into ChatGPT sometimes too. So you can comment to my interface with ChatGPT and I'll feed it into it. You comment to me, I will read it. And sometimes it takes me a few days to get around to responding. But if you're actually putting time into engaging with ideas, I will answer you eventually. Also, if I miss anyone, the one shitty thing about YouTube Studio is if someone leaves a new comment, it's like in this flagged area that I can just check for new comments. But if I've replied to a comment and someone else replies again, it doesn't flag it in the same place. I've got to remember that I had a conversation going on in that video, or it has to be like if it's the newest video, I will sometimes just do a quick scan for new replies. But sometimes I will miss them for that reason. So if we're having a conversation back and forth in the replies and I suddenly stop replying, that's why I missed it. You can always leave, if you leave a new comment, it will get into the flagged area. So you can say, hey, we were discussing this. I don't think you caught it. And you will not be spamming me or annoying me. That's absolutely what I'm asking for. Because I don't really think, well, there's two levels to this channel. One, there is just an audience. There's an audience who watches this like any other content and move on. But there also is a genuine community. I've done private sessions with some of them. We've done group events. So not only do some members of the community know me personally quite well, they know each other. And everyone's welcome to join as long as you behave. It doesn't matter what your belief set is. If you're here in a friendly, positive spirit, ideally something integral idea, you're here to get to know people, you're fucking welcome. And so Daniel, who's, one of these people I was just discussing, like longtime community member, a bunch of people know him. I know him quite well. He said the experiment with ChatGPT is very interesting. It's a plus. Excellent. Also, I saw you left a comment that I saw but didn't take the time to reply to yet because I wanted to give it something good. But your comment about the way you use ChatGPT, what was it? To imagine different thinkers throughout history locked in jail together or something like that. Whatever it was, I thought that was so fucking weird, but in the good way. Like I never would have thought to have done that. That's so fucking strange, but also so fucking interesting. So I do intend to reply to that comment, but in case you're still listening, I'll give you that reply for now. That was fucking awesome. And I would be curious to hear more about how that's gone. So I have to get going. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Shit, this starts off badly and I intended to edit it off. I don't think I have time to now. I'll probably have to do that later. But anyway, if you've made it to this point and you want to talk to anything, about anything to me in the comments, I promise I'll get around to reading them. All right. So God bless. Lunatic love to all.